Now, the US banking giant JP Morgan will pay more than $2.5 billion for its failure to uncover the Bernie Madoff fraud. Madoff was sentenced to 150 years in prison for swindling thousands of investors out of billions of dollars in what is considered the largest financial fraud in US history. JP Morgan, which handled Madoff's bank account, admitted failing to monitor the money laundering. Well, Dennis Kelleher is the president of Wall Street watchdog Better Markets. He joins us live from Washington, D.C. Dennis Kelleher, $2 billion seems like a very small fine for JP Morgan compared to the billions of dollars that Bernie Madoff swindled from investors. Is that really justice for the many people who lost all their life savings, do you think?
Well, we really don't think it is, and you're exactly right, Darren. $2.5 billion to J.P. Morgan Chase is probably about the same as $10 or $20 to the average person, not much at all. They've got a $4 trillion balance sheet, and they've already reserved for these. And Bernie Madoff was the biggest Ponzi scheme in U.S. history, ultimately exceeding about $60 or $70 billion with total losses to thousands of investors of about $20 billion. So this, in context, is not much of a fine at all. And most importantly, and most unfortunately, it doesn't punish a single individual. It just fines the bank.
We'll come back to the issue of punishment in a moment, Dennis, but let's remind our viewers this is yet another massive fine for JP Morgan. In November last year, if I'm correct, they made a $13 billion settlement with the US government for misleading investors during the housing crisis. And then, of course, in the last year alone, they've paid a total of $20 billion in fines. What's going wrong at JP Morgan?
Well, you know, JP Morgan is actually a one-bank crime spree. But it's not all that different than the crime spree happening at most of these global banks, whether they're on Wall Street or elsewhere in the world, because they're talked about as too big to fail. But more fundamentally, they're too big to manage. J.P. Morgan Chase, as I said, has about $4 trillion in assets. It has more than 250,000 employees in 60 countries around the world, operating in about 5,000 legal subsidiaries. Nobody at any given point in time knows about what's going on in most of that bank. And this case shows that because it was a complete breakdown of compliance and legal and risk evaluation. And the exact same thing happened in connection with the so-called London whale, and it happened in connection with their fraudulent activities selling subprime loans and mortgages, which total, just the fines and legal costs since 2009 have cost this bank $32 billion. And so it's too big to fail and it's too big to manage, and it's a poster child for the rest of these global banks which crashed the financial system in 2008. And they're still as big, they're still as dangerous, and they're still out of control.
Yeah, and it's an interesting point you make, Dennis, just finally, that nobody at JP Morgan will be prosecuted or go to jail. But let me ask you just briefly, why are US authorities reluctant to press criminal charges against major banks like JP Morgan? I mean, if they commit the crime, why shouldn't they do the time?
Well, you're absolutely right. We say banks don't commit crimes, bankers commit crimes. And if you want to stop crime, you have to punish bankers, not banks. And the problem is that prosecutors think that if you indict or criminally prosecute a bank, it will cause shareholders to flee and it could cause the bank to fail. And because the bank, like J.P. Morgan Chase, is so big, it will have systemic implications and hurt all sorts of other businesses and employees. To which we say, then a condition of not prosecuting a bank like this bank under these circumstances is it should be required to be small enough so it can be prosecuted next time, and so that this excuse that they're too big to fail is gone. Because right now they're incentivized to become too big because they know prosecutors won't punish them like they should.
Dennis Kelleher, thank you for talking to Al Jazeera.
Thank you.
Now, much of